Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 4th season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 30, which begins with Thor realizing he might have gone a bit far and ends with us revisiting a familiar car crash back on Earth. And today we are bringing to an end this really fun week of having a different guest for each minute. Joining us on the show today, we have another one of the hosts from TruStory FM's Family of Entertainment podcasts. It's Justin Jaeger from Trailer Rewind.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I love Thor.
Yeah, well, so that's a great setup. That was my first question for you is what do you love about Thor? Like the movie, the character, whatever it is.
So I was a comic book collector, and Thor, my love of Thor actually translates into the movies too. I like the Thor movies a lot more than most people, and I think part of it has to do with my Scandinavian background. I come from a whole bunch of Scandinavian folks too. But the initial things that I saw about Thor when I was younger was this, the whole thing with the lightning and the thunder and the godliness of what is brought to Thor and his connection with all of that stuff. That's the kind of thing that I really liked as a kid. So it's still. It comes to me. It's grown with me in my adulthood too. I still like all of the God of Thunder aspects of who Thor is, and I really like the movies because of it too.
Awesome. We'll have a lot more with JJ right after this.
We are an independent podcast from TruStory FM. We have so much fun producing the show and digging in deep on all things Thor and Norse mythology, but it does take time and cost some money. That's why we would love for you to become a member and support the show. Membership means that we can deliver content to you without selling your information and interests through different podcast advertising sources. We like our privacy. We know you do too. If you're already a member, thank you so much. If you're not, please consider becoming a member for the season. It only costs $5 per month, or we offer a discounted price if you join at the annual rate. You get bonus episodes, early access to the shows, live streams, stickers, and more. Plus, you get the comfort of knowing that you are supporting this independent podcast production. Visit truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute to learn more. Thanks.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So, JJ, let's dive right into this minute, because we start with Thor's face. And to me, I love the moment where the jerk realizes he's been a jerk, where the person realizes it's kind of that Wile E. Coyote moment where they've run out onto where there's no more land. And then now they finally look down and realize, to me, that's what I'm getting from Thor's face. Is that kind of what you're seeing there?
Yeah, well, I mean, his arrogance, his insolence, everything that's brought him through is now washed away, and he realizes that he doesn't have the real safety of his protection that he thought he might have had. I think one of the things that I had to ask you guys about his face, does Hemsworth's face change from this movie to the next?
Well, his eyebrows do.
His eyebrows.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Oh, we've been talking about his eyebrows quite a bit. I'm
so glad.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, because I didn't know, but that's just this movie, right?
Yes.
He's just got the eyebrows thing in this movie. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if it was just this scene or if it was something else, but his eyebrows noticeable. And forehead that dawning on him in this scene. The fact that his eyebrows are that way, it made him even feel a little bit more sheepish to me, I guess.
If you look for the minutes that we recorded with Ashley Coffin, who's a hairstylist and a frequent podcast host as well.
Oh, that's so great.
We actually talk a lot about the wig, the eyebrows. We go pretty deep on it. So those will be some really fun minutes for you.
Oh, listen, that's great.
I just want to say, as far as his face, though, it's interesting. And, pairing this with the last minute in 29, Thor really goes through a range of emotions here, right? I mean, at first he's so angry at his dad, and then it becomes, it's not so much anger, but it's like almost surprise at the way Odin reacts to his anger as Odin kind of gets quiet and talks, and then it almost like it's like he starts looking sad, maybe a little ashamed, maybe, but then by this point, it's like I think he's just in complete shock as to how things have turned so quickly.
Shock. I would go with shock. For me, it was vulnerability. It was surprise at his vulnerability of, all of these things, that the anger or whatever he felt before, he didn't realize he was on the line for this. And that was shocking.
Many years ago, I was a counselor at a summer camp, and
cool.
I wound up being at this place where most of the kids came from very well-to-do families where they had really, taken care of the kids. I might even say spoiled. And every now and then, when I would tell someone, yeah, you've got to clean up your bunk, the look on their face, one person actually said, but aren't you the maid? Because they were used to a housekeeper, and
I don't like that at all.
And granted, these are 13-year-olds, but are 12-year-olds,
right.
But that's kind of what Thor is here as well. The look on their face of it had never occurred to them that there could be consequences for their actions. It had never occurred to them that they might be responsible for dealing with the stuff that they do and the mess that they make. And yeah, I kind of that was a strong experience for me, but that's kind of what I see on Thor's face. It's just, it never occurred to him that Odin could be, he knows he's breaking the rule, but he's but it's for glory, of course. It just never occurs to him that Odin could have this reaction.
Well, that's what's so funny because, we talked about this back in minute, 14 or so. Mm-hmm. Sif tells him, she's like, Thor, it's forbidden. She pretty much says, she doesn't need to say much more than that. It is forbidden. Odin has forbidden people from, we don't know if it's from going to Jotunheim or interacting with the frost giants or specifically what it is, but they all know what it is, and it is forbidden. And he then, so he knows it's forbidden. He goes through with it anyway, using the flimsiest of excuses with his friends, and gets them all to do it. And so it does make you wonder, how often have things gone on with Thor to get him to this point where he makes this decision to go confront the frost giants in Jotunheim, expecting no trouble.
I think the inference is that it happens a lot.
Yeah.
That I think this is the final straw in something that has happened before. And I think the story, the way that the story leads us up to this minute, does a good job of having us believe that too.
Yeah. Especially because I had not even made this connection until you said that, Andy. Not long ago, we saw how indulgent of him his mother is. That she he's doing these ridiculous, inappropriate things, but she's just oh, you little scamp. I get the sense that there have been a number of times where he did something very wrong and his mother was just oh, just this one time we'll forget it, and maybe that's part of what's coming here.
Yeah, there's definitely, well, yeah, and I think maybe the parents' faces said all of that during the coronation scene earlier, because Frigga, she was kind of rolling her eyes and oh, Thor, and giving him those looks as Thor was, showboating in front of the crowd. And Odin stood there with a stone face, just staring at his son. And sure, it could just be that he was the king ready to lead this procession, but it also could be that, he was really tired of this behavior that he saw from Thor.
Yeah. And I think we talked yesterday about how there's a little bit of regret almost. And I think that's a part of it too. And Loki has a great reaction, but we're just going to jump ahead a few seconds. When Odin is about to kind of pronounce sentence, he hesitates for a moment. And you kind of see him look down and then kind of collect himself. And I think that part of it might be that kind of sense of he's thinking about what did I do wrong to get to this moment? Do I actually have to do this? Yes, I have to do it. It's such a complicated situation for Odin, so many complicated emotions.
I like that. I just, I remember in watching it, I'm thinking, oh, here's a dramatic pause. And for what is the effect? I love that if it's really Odin considering what he's done wrong and and really sort of levying the punishment based on what needs to happen to make things better. I think that's a great inference to that dramatic pause as well.
Well, and it's a very short beat for him to kind of process a lot of information. And so it does make you wonder, did he, as soon, because if you think about how all these pieces fell into place, Loki, he whispered to the guards told Odin came down and rescued them from Jotunheim, and all of that kind of played out. But at what point did Odin start processing, okay, what is the punishment going to be? Obviously, I guess he was waiting until he got to Jotunheim to see how much damage Thor had created. And was it just Thor's reaction to everything? Were there was there a variety of potential options he had, or had he already, like, by the time he got to Jotunheim and he saw what a mess Thor had made, had he already said, I am going to have to cast my kid out? Or what? Like, I'm curious when that decision gets made, and if it is right in that exact moment.
I think for me, I certainly thought that it's not till, Odin says, you're a vain, greedy boy. And Thor just totally unchastened spits back, you're a foolish old man. To me, the sense that I got is that that's like, he might have already thought there was going to be one punishment, but that's when he kind of said, like, okay, no, I wash my hands of this. This is done. Is that, JJ, do you get kind of a similar sense?
Sure. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you get that feeling that if he would have had remorse, that it would have changed the punishment. I don't know. I think that looking at the setting here, that it was all leading up to this, regardless of what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think his insolence in sort of spitting back, like you mentioned, only served to make Odin's wrath a little bit more intense.
That may well be possible, yeah.
Who are the loved ones, do you think? Because we finish Odin's thought right at the beginning of this minute. The last minute, he starts it off, you're unworthy, and here he finishes, of the loved ones you have betrayed. Is he just talking about himself? I mean, he says loved ones. Does he feel that this is a betrayal of everybody in Asgard? I mean, any idea who he specifically is referencing there?
Well, he could have even meant his friends that he sort of tricked into bringing there with him and putting them in peril. I don't know if, because it was something that was outlawed, that it was, forbidden, that really Thor's arrogance or overconfidence really could have, in a different situation, led to disaster for some of the most important people of his life. And
it still did. I mean, Fandral is terribly injured. Volstagg is injured. And all of them theoretically are about to get punished as well. And so, I think that it could definitely be any combination of that. So we're going to get into the actual power moment there in a second, because there's so much to unpack there. But I just have to name, there's this great moment with Loki where he literally does what I call the tennis eyes thing. You just see his eyes going back and forth between Odin and Thor. And the actor is so good at portraying, I can see there's so much he wants to say, and he's just biting his lip so hard in that moment. And
he genuinely looks sad. Like, he looks kind of, there is a sense of surprise as to what's actually happening here. Like, I don't feel, and this is why I find Loki a really compelling character, because Thor is his brother. He genuinely does love his brother. Like, there is that family bond that they share. And we talk about that over the course of the films. And I feel like there is a strong connection there. But at the same time, he also is okay having to kind of betray his brother and kind of stab him in the back, as it were, in order to get ahead. And so that's what's interesting in this moment, is I feel like there is a sense of sadness at what he's done, while also, knowing underneath there's, some excitement about, what he's going to be able to achieve now because of this.
The Loki character is one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU because of this. And I think, I don't know if at this point in the first Thor movie, they meant to really give him the depth that he accomplishes throughout the films and then on to the television series. But this is sort of the genesis of that, right? Yeah. In that he has these complex feelings, and it's portrayed so well on screen. And you can see that he's afraid and excited, and that he's the reason why this is happening to some degree, but he's also going to benefit from it. And I think that's just such an interesting thing for the Loki character. I think the fact that, the things that happen at the end, that at the end of the MCU, where Loki gets so many things happen to him, I think he became a fan favorite because of all these things. He became very real in the way that we experience emotions, in the way that we can watch him on screen.
No, I think it's very true. And we kind of talked about it somewhat yesterday, Andy. I don't see as much of the sadness as you're talking about. I think it's a little bit, but to me, it's much more the feigned sadness and the cunning. But I think, again, that's just a tribute to how good the actor is, that it's like, we don't honestly know. And I mean, if nothing else, literally minutes ago, he found out that he might himself not be Asgardian, with his skin turning blue. So I think there's just so much happening there.
Yeah, he's got a lot to process right now. That is for sure.
So let's get into a scene that seems to tell us so much, yet is kind of confusing. We've already gone into this discussion on earlier minutes about what is the hammer, because in Norse mythology, the hammer is made for Thor, or Thor takes it. We saw the hammer when he was a child. But then what Odin says is, I take away your power. And in that moment, the hammer flies into his hand. And then he says, he whispers to the hammer, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." What's going on here? Like, is the power of Thor something that others have had? Is connected to the hammer? I'm really confused about like what's the power and what's the hammer's role in it and how it all plays together. Do you have a stronger sense of this?
Well, I find it confusing too, because I misremembered it, right? I misremembered the sort of lore about the hammer, other than coming back and reviewing this minute, in that I thought it was something that was bound to Thor, like you describe here. And this idea that it is something that can be transferred or something like this is something that I guess we're going to see more of as we go forward. And as we've now witnessed in other sort of worthiness challenges to what Odin is saying here, we have examples later on in the MCU that show that people can use the power of Thor or the power that the god of thunder can possess. So I think that's really interesting. And when I talk about misremembering it, I wonder, when I watched this minute back, I thought, wait, did it start here? Is this the origin of that? Is this when that happened? Was it something different before? I think now this is what I believe is the beginning of that sort of idea in canon.
I mean, it sort of have to be, because or else why was Thor able to pick it up before then, when he was the greedy, cruel boy?
Right. Yeah, right. He wasn't, certainly, at least according to what we think Odin would say is worthy, he wouldn't have been. And I think some of it does also just go back to the comics, because in the comics, when Donald Blake, the quote cripple in the 60s original comic in Journey into Mystery, when he comes across Mjolnir, when he hits the stick on the ground and it turns into Mjolnir and he turns into Thor, it actually has that exact wording written on the hammer. And so to a certain extent, I think they're including it because it is very much kind of the Marvel comic lore, as far as like that idea that, and this is what Donald Blake, this human, was able to wield the hammer, because not only wield the hammer, but actually become Thor and fight as Thor as long as he was holding the hammer. And so I think that is part of the reason that they do that. It does end up kind of causing some of this question about, the mythology of the hammer and this spell that's on it. But I think, also to the point that you guys are making, or the point that you two are making, I think that boils down to another reason why Brana cut out that moment that would have been earlier during the Frost Giant battle, where a Frost Giant, after Mjolnir falls to the ground, the Frost Giant tries to pick it up and can't. Right. And I think that's very specific why they opted to not include that, because they were very much saying, okay, we need to make it feel like at this moment, Odin Allfather enchants this hammer, because we see that little the triquetra appear and disappear, almost like it's now officially an enchanted hammer. And so I feel like that is the MCU lore with the hammer.
I agree.
I imagine that it could have been, as part of how it was originally written, the idea might have been that at first only Thor himself could pick up the hammer, that it became kind of bound to him, but that once Odin is like, Thor has to earn the right to be like Thor in all its mighty, and so then he adds the worthiness. But I think you'd have to do so much exposition for that to make sense in terms of that scene with the Frost Giant, that I think this way is so much better to do it.
The hammer is made out of Uru, just like Gungnir, and so theoretically, and Gungnir is only supposed to be wielded and can be wielded by Odin. And so to that extent, I don't know if there's also this whole thing with Uru as far as how it gets enchanted as to who can use it. So I think that they end up finding a way to kind of skip past all of that, which would, as you said, create massive exposition just to tell us some information that, do we really need it in there? Probably not.
MCU shorthand for the win.
Exactly.
I will also say that I think it's possible we're going to get more answers about this soon, especially about the one part of the spell, if we call it that always kind of gets my hackles up a little bit. But again, written 12 years ago, 10 years ago.
12 years ago, and then in the 60s. I mean,
exactly.
That's, as I said, that's the exact wording from the comic.
Because one of the words he uses is, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. And like, Odin, patriarchal society, sure, and like the language of the 60s and stuff like that. But we have a movie where a woman is going to become Thor, quite likely, possibly, forgive spoilers, but, Thor, Love and Thunder, that's certainly what's being very hinted at. And so I'm very, maybe they just don't they just like, he means everybody. We don't know. But I am curious if that will be a little like a callback in any way if a woman becomes worthy to hold the hammer and to bear up the mantle.
And it makes me wonder, like, is it going to be something that they even point out in the context of the movie? You know, just like they did in Star Trek 6, I believe, when they changed the language of, boldly go where no man has gone before to no one has gone before. You know, they very kind of explicitly say it in context of the actual movie itself. Something like that.
I could see Taika Waititi doing a very interesting write-up of that in the way it goes.
Though I'll say, as a diehard Star Trek apologist, I don't think we can give Star Trek credit there, because I think what Kirk is saying is not man and woman, he's saying human and Vulcan. And everybody else,
Sure.
But yeah, either way, get me on a Star Trek podcast at a later date and I'll talk.
Vocabulary inclusive.
All the time there.
Right.
And I think, though, also worthy to mention as part of this, there's nothing that Odin says about lifting it. It's that, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power. Now, I didn't do great grammar, but my understanding of the structure of that sentence is certainly that anyone can hold the hammer, but you only get the power if you're worthy. And I guess this may just be where, like, arcane, beautiful language doesn't quite meet reality. But I do think it's interesting that there's nothing specific about, like, no one can lift it.
I feel like there's a semantic out in that, though, because, you kind of take this poetic stance of to be able to hold it, you need to be worthy to hold it.
Right.
Could be the same kind of thing. I agree that it's not literally the same thing, but I think that it leads you to the sort of right conclusion with that they lead us with the rest of the tests, the worthiness tests that we see in later movies.
Well, even later in this movie, as he's even unable to pick it up,
Right. So one thing that I wanted to ask about this, though, too, is he sends the hammer in one direction and Thor the other direction, right? I mean,
he sends them both into, and I know we're getting a little ahead, but I mean, he sends them both into the turret, shooting down into the Bifrost.
But isn't it the turret pointed one direction and then the hammer turret pointed the other direction? Did I get crossed up when I was watching it there? I had the kind of weird moment of he's off screen to his right with Thor and then to his left with the hammer.
The camera changes, the position. It's moving around inside Himmelbjörg here, where, he goes through the process. Yes, because when he blasts Thor, he hits him, he's blasting screen left and Thor flies off that direction. And then when he throws it, as he's whispering to it, the camera is rotating and we kind of come around to the other side of Odin. And when we actually see behind him now, we can see out the back door, or really it's the front door, I suppose, where we see Heimdall standing. We see the palace, the Rainbow Bridge and everything. And as he throws it, it's going down the same way. It's just the camera has now shifted to a different...
Interesting. I got crossed up with that in my mind as I was watching it.
Yeah. I wonder if that was intentional because of this idea that they're not landing in exactly the same spot.
Right.
I would agree with you, except for thinking of the place coming from Asgard and both landing in New Mexico.
Yeah, right. I know.
You would think that if it were two different directions, it would go more dynamically different than that.
Well, this speaks to my confusion with all of this. Like when he puts Gungnir into the keyhole, I guess we'll call it, to operate and send and cast Thor out. Like, how does he tell it where to send him?
Should go.
Is there a mental connection with whoever is like turning it on? It's unexplained, and it's just part of the quote science that comes along with this whole thing that I don't understand.
I really wonder, like, did Odin choose not to send him to Norway, which is apparently where all the Asgardians have gone until now, because, he doesn't want him to go to a place where they did worship him as a god 1,200 years ago. Or, I mean, my particular pet theory about this with the science of it is that, like, planets are rotating. And it's just sort of wherever you're lined up in that moment. And that's why the hammer lands, close, but not exactly where Thor lands, but in a totally different part of the world. But yeah.
Although that doesn't explain...
follow that line of thinking.
It doesn't explain how, like, when they're on Jotunheim, how they go to, theoretically, the exact same spot where Heimdall had dropped them off.
Jotunheim is like Asgard in that it doesn't rotate. It's just a floating island in the sky. No, I'm just kidding. I actually don't know, but I think that there's probably some science fiction explanation for it that would yield that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they go wherever they damn well please.
Thank you, creativity.
Yeah.
And then we get just one more incredible Loki reaction shot. And it's Thor being like pulled backwards. And it's funny because normally we saw before, it's like they're pulled forward by the stomach. Here he's kind of like bent over because it's like there's a hook in the back of his pants that pulls Thor out. And Loki just has this like, okay, that happens look on his face. Like it's just once again like the utter deadpan, so much going on behind the eyes, but he just doesn't show any emotion.
I don't know. He looks shocked, I think. When he turns, because he sees Thor get blasted out, and then he looks back to Odin, and he literally, like, his expression on his face is one of, like, whoa. Like, I mean, he just looks really shocked and surprised as he then kind of descends the steps to walk down toward the Bifrost. I don't think that he ever, in all of his machinations, I don't think he expected that this was exactly where things are going. But to your point, like later in this minute, like when he goes and stands next to the turret and he's just standing there and we see his face, that's where I feel like, okay, his wheels are turning again, and now he's trying to figure out how can he use all this to his advantage.
Yeah, and I apologize. That was the specific moment I was talking about, where he is standing.
Yeah.
We see him kind of on the side of the shot as Thor is pulled out into the Bifrost.
I'm just interested. I can't wait to hear the episodes with the hairstylist to find out what she thinks about Hiddleston's hair in this movie compared to all the rest. I mean, he looks like a drowned rat here. They changed so much from what we have here in terms of their look, but he becomes so much more godly in the way that he styles his hair after these movies.
Yeah, this is little baby Tom, in a way that we had not expected. And Ashley, among other things, heads up what they refer to as Thirstcast as part of the MCU podcast. So
I love it.
She actually did a whole podcast with me about the ethics of thirst, and so she'll have a lot to say about both how Tom and Chris look in this moment.
I love it.
It'll be a lot of fun.
I want to jump back for a minute and just talk about, because we kind of skipped over, as soon as Odin takes the hammer, we skipped kind of like that whole bit where he actually goes through the process of the casting out, where he actually talks about, in the name of my father and his father before, I, Odin Allfather, cast you out, which I think there's a lot of gravitas to that. Like he's like taking it all the way back through history to kind of get this power to cast him out. And the way he does it, when he grabs Thor's hammer and he kind of like points it at Thor and forces his armor, like first all the chainmail on his right arm along with the vambraces fall off, and then his left arm, and all of that kind of falls off. And I think that's just an interesting continuation of what we had seen in the last minute as he started kind of stripping him of his ranks, taking the different pieces off of his chainmail, off of his armor, taking his cape off. And I find that a really interesting element, especially because it's now Odin wielding Mjolnir and almost using the power of Mjolnir to kind of do this to Thor. And I find that like there's a lot of, I guess, power in kind of this whole moment here as he's doing that.
Yeah, I find it, I like it. I like the way it works on screen. I like the effectiveness of the gravitas like that you're mentioning there. And I almost, in watching it, it makes me wish that they had returned to that sort of concept that of the power or the importance of his uniform or of his costume, of all of that later on in the MCU, to show that that when he was really connected with who he was and his purpose in life, that he was able to wear that proudly and this kind of stuff. If it does happen, it's not something that's explicit. It's not something that's talked about as much as it is in this moment. And I like it in this minute of the film.
Yeah.
That's something that we were talking about, is like, as we continue forward with the film, just looking at the armor on the Einherjar guards, on all the other, like on the Warriors 3, and seeing like, can we find any of these distinguishing elements on them that kind of mark their rank? So I'm curious if we'll be able to find that throughout.
That's great. Right.
It is also another fun departure from mythology in which Odin honors his grandfather so much that he kills him in one of the myths. Right. So, but I think it kind of works because one thing we talked about before is that in the myths, Odin and Thor are immortal, kind of like the Greek gods. They can be killed, but they don't really age once they hit their age. And that doesn't really work for this story because the story is all about the idea that Thor will one day take over for Odin, which is never a part of the mythology. And so I do think that like my father and my father before me establishes this idea of like that there is this chain of succession of the father deeming the son worthy that has happened before these two, because that's not a part of the mythology. And so I like that kind of like little bit way to establish that.
It creates a powerful, I mean, one of the most powerful moments in the film, like these minutes watching this whole process of them going through this ritual of casting them out and connecting it to the family, at least that we're getting in context of the film. I think it's really, really strong.
It's a very compressed or quick way to explain the mythology, and by that I don't mean the Norse mythology. Right. I mean the mythology of what we're going to experience here for Thor and his place in the MCU, and I think it's done really, really well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I think then we see Thor kind of like cast down to Earth.
Yeah, the Bifrost trip, which I will say, this looks so much more chaotic. And so to that end, like he doesn't have Mjolnir, and I don't know if like because of that or just the way he went through it, he has no control. Like he's like flailing as he goes through the Bifrost this time.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because he doesn't have Mjolnir or because like he didn't, it's kind of like stepping onto a train versus being thrown onto it,
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, right. But it looks like a much more rough Bifrost trip than any of the ones we've seen so far.
Very much so.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you think about like we were talking just a couple of days ago about how when Odin lands on Jotunheim with his horse, it's this very majestic entrance, and like everyone just can't help but stare. I think we had some fun with that idea. But here it's such a different thing. And so it's nice to see like just the Bifrost can work in very many different ways.
Yeah. Well, and this is the only time actually that we see Odin operating it. Like before, well, I guess not. We'll see. No, it's always Heimdall. Even when other people are convincing Heimdall to use it, it's always Heimdall operating the Bifrost, except for this one moment when it's being operated with Gungnir by Odin.
I'm trying to remember the order in the later movies. Is the Bifrost destroyed? Oh yeah, the Bifrost is actually destroyed at the end of this movie. So of course, right. Heimdall is. And does it ever get rebuilt in Ragnarok?
Yep. It gets rebuilt by the time we're in the second movie.
So is there a time where the Bifrost exists after Heimdall has been killed? Or I think Heimdall's killed after the Bifrost is destroyed again.
Ragnarok's happened, right, because they have left. They have left Asgard.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Heimdall is killed.
So we've never seen like what would happen to the Bifrost if Heimdall wasn't there.
But we do see him operate it. We do see him operate it, not from the observatory.
Well, no, I mean like if he was dead. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Not at this point.
Yep.
But that will be curious to see, like moving forward now in Thor: Love and Thunder. How are they traveling through the Bifrost? It's going to be interesting.
I guess apologies for spoilers for one of the 5 most popular movies of all time. So then, of course, now we go through the Bifrost trip and we land on Earth. And this is really an ingenious thing because this is a scene we've seen before, but now it's a little bit better lit. And now we're getting, we're seeing what's happening. We've seen this before, but now we know all the context for it. What's it like for you kind of seeing the scene a second time?
I love how it plays because it really puts you in that. In shorthand, we see very quickly just the shots we need to be establishing, we're right back in the place where we were at the beginning of the film. They crash into Thor. And I think that's a great setup for it. And if you actually go back and look at minute 3, when all of this happened, and you compare shot by shot, or frame by frame of the shot when he gets hit by the car, it's the exact same shot. But what they did is they just manipulated the lighting. So in that earlier version, it's all just a silhouette of a dark, shadowy figure that you can't tell. Now he's backlit. You can see that it's Thor, and we kind of know, okay, this is what gets us back to that place.
And it's perfect. It's effective storytelling because we have his backstory now.
Yeah.
So of course you can see him just like we, the audience, can see him. So now he's illuminated to everyone, and and we have that. I think it's a really smart way to tell the story.
Well, and it answers Jane's question, which we left on Earth when she says, "Where did he come from?" Like, what a great way to kind of contextualize all of this and get us to this point.
Especially because we talked about this when we were first getting started with this project. the world of Asgard and the world of New Mexico are so fundamentally different. Not just how they look, but like the tone of storytelling, the language that's used, the, people walking around in robes with swords versus, jeans. And I think this is such a good way to show not only like the transition between the two, but the clash of the two. Because, so much of what we get next is a fish out of water story. And so this is just such a perfect way, I think, of setting that up.
Right. Slam them into the windshield.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just to, we haven't talked about this really since the beginning of our journey here in this particular movie, but the whole meanwhile in the MCU element of this particular story, we are finally back at that place where we had been. This was May, technically we're on May 31st. Interestingly, and I guess it's just one of those things, Thor and his troops, his coronation and the infiltration of Odin's vault, all of that happened on May 30th, 2010, and Thor made the decision to attack Jotunheim same day, but it must have been late in the night because according to the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki, he actually returns to Asgard with Odin and he gets cast out on the 31st. So at some point we crossed the midnight hour.
Well, I mean, Asgard to New Mexico, there's probably some time zone differences, so like, but yeah, I mean, and I will say,
well, yeah, Asgard doesn't follow daylight savings, so that changes everything,
that's exactly what it was, right?
They cross the interstellar date line at some point, I will say also as part of that, if anyone who hasn't seen it, the third episode in the animated show What If does a really great job of showing a different version of the three stories, but a great way of sort of tying together and showing you like the interplay of the Thor movie, the Incredible Hulk movie, and Iron Man 2. It's really kind of a wonderful way.
Really fun extension.
Yeah, and now all I can think of is lavender every time I see Thor.
Yeah.
Is that lavender? Yeah. Oh, and also today, and going back to our one shot, this same day, the 31st, is when Agent Coulson starts his drive from LA to New Mexico. So, there you go.
Well, that makes sense.
So much happening.
Of course.
Yeah. Right, because we're about to have a hammer land in the middle of the desert. So.
All right. Well, JJ, is there any part of this that we haven't yet touched on that you wanted to get into?
I don't think so. It's a good minute. There's a lot happening in it.
Yeah,
definitely
juicy
is.
One. Yeah.
Well, hopefully folks who are listening here are already clued in to a lot of other things that the Next Reel family is doing. But if there aren't, tell us a bit about your podcast and what you do and where people can find you.
So Trailer Rewind is a show where we kind of focus on films that you may have missed, that maybe didn't have a big theater release, or maybe you don't know about at all. The idea behind it is that Steve and I, first Steve Sarmento, the host of the show, and myself, both got our start working in video stores back in the late 80s and early 90s. So we represent those kind of video store clerks that know you because you come in and watch movies all the time, and we can give you an idea of, hey, this might be something you want to try or might not want to try. So you can find us at truestory.fm/trailer-rewind, and all of our shows are available there. They go into our back catalog and things too. There are a lot of hidden gems there. A lot of people ask us all the time, oh, it's a movie that I hadn't seen before. What would you recommend? All of our movies that we've reviewed are there, and there's some really fun ones to check out there if you get a chance. So Trailer Rewind on the Next Reel True Story FM network.
Definitely. Well, I think folks should definitely check that out. There's great stuff happening there. I need to ask, though, knowing you have that background, Clerks is by no means an unknown movie. It's incredibly popular.
Sure.
But just because one of the stars, Randall, is exactly the person you're talking about, the video store guy, I'd kind of love to hear your commentary on that. Is that a movie you guys have ever covered?
On Clerks, we haven't. Now, again, the genesis for this was that at one point on the Next Reel main show, they would talk about trailers, right? So trailers of movies that were coming out, and some of them got big releases and some of them didn't. So the idea of Trailer Rewind is to go back and take some of those that didn't get big releases and talk about those because, maybe people didn't hear about them. So Clerks is a little bit before our time, but a lot of these have come out in the last 5-10 years and are interesting and usually available on streaming services too. That's a real key thing that we can find because everybody's stuck in their house now and there's no Blockbuster to go to anymore to get your videos from. So I love Clerks and I love all the Kevin Smith stuff, but that is the guy. That's who we are.
Okay. That's awesome. I know no Blockbuster. Scattered around the country, there's a couple family videos, which I'm convinced are drug fronts because I don't know how anyone's making money, but there's a couple of businesses open, but it's a great podcast. Definitely check it out. Check out everything you got going on the Next Reel family of podcasts. Of course, for folks who want to hear of more my stuff, please check out Superhero Ethics Podcast or the Star Wars Universe Podcast. And most importantly, Andy and JJ, thank you guys so much for being a part of this. To all of our fans, thank you for sticking with us. And as always, love to hear what your thoughts are. And most importantly, have a good day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of TruStory FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at trustory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.